today's recipe is for stuffed mushrooms. This is a great holiday menu. You can use it as a main dish for vegans or vegetarians or as a side dish. It's just really filling, has lots of good plant-based protein and healthy fats in it. We're starting with 1 pound of mushrooms. You can use any type of mushrooms you like. These are just basic white button mushrooms. The first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, is you're going to wash your mushrooms, just kind of wipe them off, make sure there's no dirt on them. And then we're going to wiggle the stems out of the caps. So we're going to separate the caps from the stems by just giving it a little wiggle. And you can see here, I'm placing the caps into our baking dish. I'm using a cast iron pan because I think it gives really nice caramelization. But if you want to use a glass baking dish or anything else, that's fine. And as we take out the stems, we're going to save them because we're going to add them into our stuffing later for our recipe. And you're going to see I'm just working through these and just keep taking the stems out. And once those are all done, we're going to move on to our stuffing. Okay, last few mushrooms here. Okay, and we are going to start our stuffing in another cast iron pan over medium heat. You're going to start by drizzling 1 tablespoon of high heat neutral cooking oil in your cast iron pan. I'm using avocado oil here because it has a great high heat smoke point. Then you're going to take 1 onion, medium sized, white, yellow, red, whatever kind you like, and we're just going to do a fine dice in that. So we're going to cut it in half, take all the peels off of it, and then to dice that, we're just going to take our knife, take off the 2 ends, so you're just end up with the onion, and then you're going to run your knife alongside one direction, turn your onion 90 degrees, and chop it the other direction. You can see me here, going one direction and the other, so just slice and dice. And then as soon as you dice that, you're going to add that directly to the pan and begin to cooking that over medium heat while you prepare the ingredients for the rest of the stuffing. And you want to make sure everything's cut kind of small here because the mushrooms, the cavities aren't that big. So by cutting all of our ingredients small, you're going to make sure that the stuffing is evenly mixed and fits well inside of the mushrooms. Okay, and that's going to go straight into the pan. Like I said, that pan is already heated over medium heat, and that'll be cooking. You'll cook your onions while you cut the rest of your vegetables. And you'll just want to check on those vegetables, give them a stir every few minutes, and make sure that everything cooks evenly. And we don't have to cook the vegetables all the way here because they're going to get cooked again in the mushrooms once we bake the whole dish together. We just want to make sure we get a little caramelization, get a little brownness, get some flavor on those. The next thing that we are going to chop up is the mushroom stems. So you're going to take all of the mushroom stems that we reserved from earlier, and we're going to start by trimming them. So just get your eyes on them. And I like to trim the end off that was not inside the mushroom, so the trimmed end. And just because it can be a little dry, and then you're also just going to visually inspect them because sometimes they can be a little soft or slimy. And anything that just kind of looks discolored or has a weird texture, you want to make sure you cut off, get rid of those. And then the stems that are left, everything that looks clean and beautiful and firm, we're going to give those a fine dice to get even more mushroom flavor into this dish by putting those mushrooms into the pan with the onions. So those stems are all cleaned up now, and same thing, I'm just going to run the knife through those till we get a fine dice, one direction then the other. I'm just making sure that everything's nice and even here, and also keeping an eye on our onions, making sure that those are cooking evenly, keeping stirring as we chop. Okay, we're just about done wrapping up all these mushrooms now. And those will just go straight into the pan on top of the onions. And once you've cut everything, it's nice to kind of just run your knife through all of your vegetables again. Make sure that there's no big chunks, just getting an eye on them. Like I said, we want everything to be cut pretty finely. And the onions are starting to just brown on the edges, which is exactly what we're looking for, which means it's time to add all of our little mushroom stem pieces. And along with the mushrooms, we're going to add a half teaspoon of salt. This is going to help kind of draw the liquid out of the mushrooms, which will help them cook down. And like I said, that mushroom flavor is going to come out and flavor the onions, flavor the rest of the vegetables that we're putting in there. And so we'll just let those cook. And we're going to keep an eye out for them to kind of release that liquid and that flavor into the pan. And while we're waiting for that, we're going to cut our other vegetables. We have 1 carrot. This has already been pre-washed. It is organic. And 1 rib of celery pre-washed as well. And we're just going to trim the edges off those to make sure that we don't have any weird dry spots. And then we're going to slice long way down our carrot and make thin strips, kind of like you're making carrot sticks. And then we're going to cut them the other way. So you can see you have your thin strip there. And then we're just going to slice down the length of that to give ourselves kind of like a julienne size strip. And then once we have these thin strips through all of our pieces of carrots, cut both ways, you know, about a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch. We're just going to line those up. Always check your mushrooms and onions. Make sure those are still cooking well. Finish slicing your carrots. There's a lot of chopping in this recipe, but by making sure that everything's cut to the same size, everything's going to cook at the same time, you're going to get a little bit of all the vegetables and the bites, and you're going to have a really nice flavor. And then we're just going to dice down those strips of carrots, getting those little bite-size squares that we're looking for. And then we're going to do the same process with the celery. Along the rib of the celery, we're just going to run the knife down lengthwise, getting those nice same kind of 1/4 inch strips. You can see that there. And then run the knife along all of those, giving your fine dice. Okay. And then once again, we're just going to give it a quick visual inspection, and then you can just run your knife through the whole pile of vegetables, mixing the carrots and celery together and making sure that everything is really nice, keeping an eye out for any large pieces, because even though we were very careful with our knife cuts, sometimes some of those big pieces sneak in. And it's looking like the mushrooms are ready and they've begun to release that liquid. So the carrots and celery are going to go right on top. Okay. Give that all a stir, mixing everything together nice and evenly. And then we're just going to keep cooking those vegetables just a few more minutes, like I said, just to get a little bit of flavor and color on them. They don't have to be cooked all the way through. And now we're going to start adding our aromatics and flavoring these vegetables. And we're going to start with we're going to add 2 cloves of garlic, cut the end off, give them a smash with your knife, and take the peels off. And the peels should pop right off easily after you give them that little smash with your knife. If you're not comfortable doing that, of course, you can just peel them manually. And if your cloves of garlic are small, feel free to use 3, or if you like extra garlic, you can always bump that up. And then just a fine mince, just run your knife through that garlic, getting it really nice and fine. Obviously, if you like more garlic, you can add more garlic, or if you like it chunkier. But since we are trying to get everything very even in this one, we'll do a fine dice on that. And then that's just going to go right into the mixture with everything else. We're going to give that a stir, make sure everything's cooking evenly, looking for a little bit of color on those carrots, seeing that the mushrooms are continuing to kind of shrink down and let their liquid go. And into the pan with the garlic. And you don't want to cook garlic too long because it can get bitter. So just till you start to smell it, it becomes fragrant before it turns brown. And then we're going to add some fresh cracked pepper. Just about a half teaspoon there. And then our Italian spice, 1 whole tablespoon of this, which is a lot of spice, but it has a lot of those really nice poultry flavoring kind of flavors. It's going to be reminiscent of Thanksgiving and those flavors that we're used to for the holidays. And that's just really going to pull this all together. And then we're just going to stir, make sure our vegetables are cooked. We're almost done with making the stuffing. And just, watching the garlic, making sure it doesn't burn, smelling the garlic. And we're going to turn the heat off now as we prepare the last couple of ingredients. We have 1 cup of cooked brown rice. So you're going to cook that before you start the recipe. It can be hot, it can be cold, it can be leftover. But just already pre-cooked brown rice, a nice whole grain. You're going to get really nice fiber, protein, and a nice nutty flavor for using the brown rice, extra fiber, like I said. And we're going to mix that in evenly. And that's just about our whole base for our stuffing. So just keep mixing that till it's warmed through. And then we're going to add a little bit of walnuts, a half cup of walnuts. Just raw untoasted walnuts, and just cut those until they're fine so they can be, like I said, small dice like everything else. And this is going to add a little more flavor, a little more protein, and some beautiful healthy fats into the recipe. And and if you don't like walnuts, feel free to use any other nut. If you have a nut allergy, you can always leave them out. I do think that the nuttiness is important though. So if you aren't using nuts, I would suggest adding something like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds, like a seed instead of a nut. Pecans are also really always nice in stuffing. I like walnuts in this one for sure. And once again, we're just mixing it to make sure that everything's evenly distributed because you want to make sure you get a little bit of all the flavors in each bite. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to add is a half cup of vegetable broth. You can use homemade, you can use packaged. Obviously, be careful about your own salt intake. If you're on a low sodium diet, you're going to want to use sodium free. If you're worried about, sodium and all, you can just use water. Or if you don't have broth on hand, just whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you like to use. This is just like an organic vegetable broth from the store that I'm using. And that's our stuffing. We're just going to keep mixing it, make sure that everything is saturated with the broth. And then we're going to stuff our mushrooms. So here's our mushroom caps that we emptied earlier and that we had to the side. And they're already ready to go. And then you're just going to take a little spoonful. You can use a measuring spoon or your hands or a scoop, and you're just going to add a little bit of the stuffing. I'm actually going to get a smaller spoon here. So this is, a tablespoon measuring spoon, and that makes it really nice to scoop. And you want to really push the stuffing into the cavities of the mushrooms and then adding a little extra on top, kind of like a dome, to make sure that they're really nice and hearty, because the stuffing will shrink up a little bit too as it bakes. And we're just going to go through, and you're going to stuff every single one of your mushrooms. And you're probably going to have some extra stuffing left over. And that's fine. You can just bake it on its own or eat it as it is. It's really delicious. And once you get all of your mushrooms stuffed, you're going to cover this in foil, put it in your oven, and bake it just till the mushrooms are cooked through and they start to brown on the edges. And those are your stuffed mushrooms. Just come out of the oven, and you can tell they're done because the mushrooms are soft and they're also slightly browned on the top and the bottom. And if you want them a little crispier, you can always drizzle them with a little more oil and put them underneath the broiler for a minute. But it's just really up to you. And those are our rice stuffed mushrooms.
Cooking for Health. A community cooking class brought to you by First Choice Community Healthcare, Agricultura Cooperative Network, La Cosecha, and other valued community partners. Thank you for watching. Tune in for the next fun and healthy recipe from Cooking for Health.